according to the World Bank, since the mid-90s, global remittances have also outstripped ODA by a factor of 3, which I think we saw in the poll. On the next slide, you will see an illustration of remittances outstripping FDI, and also, for example, in 2018, remittances to Africa were $87 billion, outstripping both ODA and foreign direct investment that year, which was a total of $81 billion. So as you can see, these are all positive. Remittances are resilient, they are constant support, and there's a lot more to be said. But moving on the next slide, this is where we have the data on predictions. Of course, the story is that for 2020, remittances, global remittances to developing countries are going to fall by 20%. And in sub-Saharan Africa, this could be as high as 23%. It's also important to mention the impact on the diaspora and migrant communities themselves, who also form a part of the BME communities, who have been themselves impacted by the virus. This impact on the diaspora and migrant community not only impacts on remittances, but also on skills sharing. Some of those affected would be the same individuals and communities who share skills and expertise with countries of origin. Even with a decline, remittance flows are still expected to become even more important as a source of external financing, and they're expected to grow by 5.6% in 2021, whereas foreign direct investment is expected to drop even more by as much as 35%. So the next and final slide addresses silver linings in the short and long term. And there are some great examples of things that have taken place at diaspora level, national level, international, and so on, and all of which provide us with some great opportunities to look forward to medium and long-term initiatives that add significantly to the current funding landscape. Some of these examples relate to diaspora organizations who are raising funds, transferring skills, etc. So just some quick examples. The Tunisian diaspora platform Atouj raised funds to support the crisis in Tunisia. They carried out workshops with local entrepreneurs and small businesses to strengthen their resilience. Sudan Doctors Union in the UK provided cylinders for oxygenation. They continue to liaise closely with the Ministry of Health to ensure up-to-date information on what is needed. The Somalian diaspora organization HERDA, which is based in the UK and in the Netherlands, have translated government guidelines on COVID-19 to the Somali diaspora community, and have also contributed to providing food packages to communities in Somalia. And you've also got other government and international-led, sort of departments of governments, such as the offices of the diaspora in Ghana and South Africa, who have set up trust funds and have reached out to their diaspora communities, asking them to support and to contribute, which they have done. On the international the level, there's been also a collaboration between the UK and Switzerland. It's a call to action, which Afford and others have joined to keep remittances flowing. It calls for, among other things, remittances to be deemed as essential services, support for investment in digital solutions, and the strengthening of the digital capacity of users. And all of this is also an opportunity for us to redouble efforts on policy frameworks such as SDG Target 10C, which calls for reducing the cost of remittances to less than 3% by 2030. And finally, the real silver lining that I would like to leave you with are the concepts that we call them Remit Aid and Remit Plus. These are concepts, some already in practice, and these are for structured and collective action that transform remittances into a sustainable form of international development finance. Some of these relate to tax relief on remittances, government subsidies on transaction costs, remittance, the match fund schemes, and these deserve serious consideration, especially in times like these, when collaborative efforts are able to be beneficial for both the receiving and sending countries. If we could just circle back to the first slide, which had the sort of half circle thing, I would like to finish there in terms of where I started. The second part shows the added value of developing diaspora structures, investment products, remittance match fund schemes, diaspora bonds, and this is where the Remit Aid and Remit Plus concepts actually sit. It's about providing structures for collective pooling and impact. At Afford, we developed a diaspora finance program that leverages diaspora investment by providing a match fund, and this has seen more than 50% diaspora financial contribution into the program. The contribution of that one person making an impact on 4.5 people can be leveraged even more with the development of structures like these. And I will end there, and hopefully there may be some questions to answer. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stella, for that very interesting and informative presentation. And yes, there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. So please, everyone, if you do have a question for Stella, have a think and note that down. So now I'd like to hand over the mic to Michael Mapstone from CAF to hear more about philanthropy and direct flows.
Thanks, Tom. Many thanks for inviting me to be here. Delighted and great to be able to present some of our work. We have a poll, as last time as well, with 2 truths and 1 lie. I'll give you 20 seconds to point out the one that you think is false before I kind of kick off properly.
Michael, I hate to say everyone seems to have spotted the lie already.
Brilliant, that's good. Excellent. Yeah. So the false one is the last one there, that the number of CSOs operating in Tanzania has sharply decreased since the 1990s. That, from a lot of our research and findings, is predominantly because the government has been pulling back from a range of public services, but also an increased need for more advocacy within the country around government restrictions of civil society. The first true statements, I think, really highlight an opportunity for local civil society, and that will be quite a bit that I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So to kick off, just so people might be aware, CAF does a lot of research on giving trends and civil society, not only in the UK but globally. We are an international charity, and a lot of our work, certainly for middle-income countries, really focuses on how we can support and invest in the civil society infrastructure, mostly to support the growth of giving and effective philanthropy, but also looking at how we can build civil society resilience at the national level. We have partners across many parts of the world, including India, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, and Turkey. And that's partly because we see a big opportunity in what would be called the localization agenda, especially around harnessing the potential of local cultures of giving and social action. I think before I get onto the silver linings that we're seeing from the pandemic, it might be useful to take a step back to see what was happening beforehand from some of the research that we were doing, and to really focus on 3 countries, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Last year, we started working in partnership with the Aga Khan Foundation, Mott Foundation, and the National Lottery Community Fund to really do some in-depth research into all those countries to get a better understanding of the local cultures of giving and what the potential of mass public giving and mass public engagement in social action really is. You'll probably know that all of these countries have experienced massive economic growth over the past 15, 20 years. And with that, there's been a growth of middle classes and therefore disposable incomes have been growing. The research that we've been doing, and we'll have a couple of reports coming out in the next month or so, really highlights the fact that, well, it confirms what I think many people know, is that all these countries have a very strong culture of giving, albeit mostly informal, but we're seeing the growing middle class in all of these countries donating around 25% of their earnings each month. And interestingly, through our surveys and our focus groups with individuals, most saw this as being actually less than they really were giving. The average is, from their perspective, is more around 30–35%. The majority of this giving is very much informal, acting as a social safety net for extended family, friends, and communities. But we're certainly seeing the growth of giving to local civil society organisations growing. And most people that we surveyed and had in our focus group said that they would and could give more. So there's an untapped opportunity there that I think we could be harnessing. The big question, I suppose, is, how will COVID impact this? And we certainly know that the impacts of COVID will clearly push back many of the economic and development gains that we've seen over the past 10 years or so. One of the questions that we're trying to understand is whether it will actually impact the local culture of giving. If we can move to the next slide, I think this is where we'll see some of the silver linings. There's a lot that we're seeing globally around the positive impacts of COVID when it comes to funding and philanthropy. So we're certainly seeing funders move to a position of funding at core cost, unrestricted level, which is really positive. I think that comes with a caveat where, in the context of international development and funding across borders, we're seeing governments across the world bringing in policies that are restricting foreign funding. And only yesterday we saw India put in more restrictions on foreign funding on civil society. So whilst we're seeing a lot more core costs and unrestricted funding coming through, we're seeing barriers coming up that may limit that potential. The other two big things here, I think, that are worth really touching on are around localization. The pandemic, certainly global in nature, but the impact and the response has manifested at a highly local level. So this has put a real new emphasis on notions of locality and community within civil society. In the context of international aid, one of the things I think we need to think about is whether this presents a risk, and that this new focus results in a charity begins at home kind of narrative, and especially a mindset within people, and really push people to think more about giving at the local level. There are positives and negatives to that. From a northern base, do we want individuals and funders to still keep their global nature, despite this localization that's happening? But from a middle-income country and a lower-income country perspective, actually maybe there's a positive in that localization piece as well. The second one is shifting power. We're seeing a real acceleration of the power shift. Certainly some of that is purely about the nature of COVID and its local impact, but also we have to remember that the pandemic has really highlighted many other issues and has brought about massive upsurge in activity around things like racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement. So this has certainly created a highly more accelerated conversation within the world of philanthropy about the need to find models that can shift power as well as financial resources if we are to achieve the sort of transformative change that can address fundamental structural inequalities. So there'll be some interesting developments, I think, around this as philanthropy certainly starts to think longer term. If we could move to the next slide, please. I think the big thing to touch on here is globally, we've seen a massive mobilization of people and community response to the pandemic, which is really encouraging and really, really fascinating. I think one of the big things that we're seeing more discussed now is around mutual aid and mutual aid networks. This poses actually loads of questions, certainly from our perspective, from a philanthropy side. So there's lots of questions on the slide there that I think would be useful for us all to take away and maybe have a bit of a think about. I think the big thing is around the emergence of mutual aid networks is encouraging, though we need to be clear that this is very different to traditional charity or philanthropy. And these are the kind of the questions that I think we need to be asking in that context. A couple of the key ones, I think, are these new mutual aid groups, do they have longevity, or are they merely short-term response to a unique moment? If so, how do we harness the potential of these networks? Does the enthusiasm for mutual aid really suggest an opportunity to enlarge the funding pie for civil society, or are we just going to be slicing the same pie differently because more people get involved in mutual aid as a replacement for charitable giving or volunteering that they would have done otherwise? And lastly, how can we start to really learn, certainly from other cultures with rich traditions in informal support and mutual aid? And this comes back to some of the things I was saying earlier from our research on Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania, where it really highlighted the importance that notions of individual mutual support and care, such as Harambe or Ubuntu, can play in shaping the culture of support for civil society. And many other countries around the world have their own comparable traditions. So the next slide, please. So the pandemic has certainly seen, the other big thing that we're seeing is this acceleration of digital transformation, and how can we support long-term innovation? Big questions here in terms of where does the sector go when it comes to digital transformation. I think two of the big things that the sector really needs to be thinking about: what new risks does increasing the reliance on large parts of civil society on digital infrastructure and platforms bring, certainly in the context of cybersecurity, government surveillance and censorship, for example. And additionally, actually, will we see more CSOs get involved in these advocacy efforts to start to push back on some of the restrictions around a digital civil society that may bring? Certainly, it's a bit of a wake-up call, I think, of our reliance on technology and how we all respond to the bigger issues. So I think, to kind of summarize, where are we now? From CAF's perspective, what we're seeing is that COVID-19 has accelerated a shift in behavior and power, and certainly proved the relevance and potential and effectiveness of localization, especially around mass public giving. A global recession is on the way. We know it could turn back decades of development, both economic and other forms of development. The big question is, will this impact on the giving environment, especially the giving environment at the local level? Perhaps we can move to the next slide. Before the pandemic, our research highlighted the great potential of emerging middle classes in middle-income countries. 2 billion entering middle class, with a potential of 320 billion being able to be donated for civil society. And we have to remember that public giving is often unrestricted giving, so this is hugely relevant for the sector. People across many parts of the world are giving between 20 and 30% of their income to friends and family and so on. How can we translate that into donations to civil society, especially at a time when we're seeing increased restrictions at a policy and a regulatory level? This increase in local support is going to be hugely important for civil society to rebuild post-COVID. And to build back better, we really must place civil society at the centre throughout the pandemic, especially at the local level. Very few governments really recognise the power and potential and the need for civil society and giving as part of their core response. Civil society was at the centre and the front line, but with no real policy or government support. When generosity and local action was finally recognised, governments have acted to harness this, to leverage additional funds and support many countries. But many of the countries, especially across middle-income countries and lower-income countries, really found a lack of infrastructure to support this mobilisation of people, of funding, and of civil society effectively, especially to do that in parallel with a government response. So CAF is really calling on governments and other actors within international development to really include in our investments in the future around building back, that civil society and philanthropy infrastructure really needs to be at the heart of our response, and looking at how we do harness and grow cultures of giving and really strengthen the enabling environment for civil society to thrive. And those are kind of the big things that we're focused on, and looking forward to questions and also comments from other panelists. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. Lots of food for thought for all of us there. We'll go now over to Zoe to hear more about silver linings in the institutional fundraising space.
Thanks, everybody. So again, there are some questions on your screen, and we're asking you to look for the false there. And most of the questions you can see from me are about the funding that the UK government gives. So that's because I've been asked to speak about institutional funding. So the silver lining is that, as the final one, UKAid Direct did release funding for COVID-19, which medium, smallish organisations were able to access. So that's the silver lining there. So Laura, as I said, asked me to speak about positive things going on in terms of COVID and funding and money that your organisations will be able to access. Now, I want to put a bit at the beginning that I know that it is tough out there at the moment. It is difficult to raise funds. You will all be experiencing that at the moment. But I am going to look to the positive side of this. And because there are ways to get money, and the slide here tells you just that. So this is looking at the good news. So at Bond, we've been surveying our members to try and understand how they're getting funding through, whether they are able to operate, whether their programs are continuing. And you can see from here, 91% of NGOs said, and the Bond members said that they were responding to COVID-19, which is brilliant. It means that money is getting through and they'll be able to work in the communities that they support and that they work in. So that is really good news. The second point that you can see here is that 59% of those organisations said that they secured additional funding. So there is money out there that you can access. And you can see that there are other stats here that you can read for yourselves, that 41% have been able to do it without extra financial support, and organisations are pivoting existing programmes, existing funding agreements that they have with donors over to COVID-19, which is also brilliant. It's not all positive there. So lots of organisations have had to dip into their financial reserves, and public fundraising, which brings that all-important unrestricted funding, has also been a great way for organisations to kind of tap in and help respond as well. Now, quite a lot of organisations have been able to access money from foundations, and there's kind of a small amount that has been coming through from DFID, which is now the FCDO. And you can see an even smaller amount there coming through from DFID country offices, which NGOs have been able to access on the ground. So money is coming out, organisations are responding to COVID-19, but it's kind of a bit of a blended mix between some additional new funding, but then also relying on unrestricted and reserves there as well, which will be worrying in the long term for organisations. But now talking about good things, so moving over to the next slide, please, Laura. There is money from the UK government available for NGOs. It is difficult. I will definitely put my hands up saying it is difficult, and there is a lot of competition out there. But they did provide humanitarian funding for UK NGOs. So there was £20 million that went through their rapid response facility. Unfortunately, that was just for pre-existing organisations, but there are bits of money coming out. And as I said, for those organisations that had existing UK Aid direct grants with the FCDO, they were able to apply for a smaller pot of rapid response funding. Unfortunately, that was only for existing grantees, but it's showing that there is money there. And the kind of the new round, or the most recent round that's going on at the moment of UK Aid Direct, is also looking for COVID response, and so is the Small Charities Challenge Fund. They may slightly be repurposing existing money, so they have blurred the lines a little bit there, but at least there's money coming through. And what we are seeing as well is the other government departments, such as the Department for International Trade, have been putting out calls for funding as well. And you can see there on the slide, there was one on Supply Chains Fund as well. They've also partnered with different organisations such as Unilever, and they put together a £100 million fund on hygiene and behaviour change as well. And we are starting to see more money trickling through the country offices, which as part of the merger will be merging with the consulates as well. And if it's a grant, there's from what I'm hearing is a lot of the country offices, because they're grants, they're giving out grant money through the country offices. It doesn't have to go through quite as stringent procurement processes. And I think some of the DFID country offices, FCDO country offices, are more are doing it in more of an informal way than others. So it'll be interesting if you have people in country or partners in country, I would recommend that they go out and try and connect directly with the FCDO staff members there. They try and get themselves part of the kind of the national level kind of working groups, which I believe that the FCDO use and kind of will have kind of email lists. So if there are call for proposals, they will kind of come out that way. Oh, can I just go back to the previous slide, please? Thanks. And then just finally, the last slide, sorry, the last point, there are a lot of research grants out at the moment. I would definitely recommend, if you are looking and if you think that your organisation has some sort of niche, be it something to do with education or health, you probably have a lot of expertise that you don't realise you have, that will be really useful to a larger research grant. And a lot of these kind of a lot of these universities that may be applying, they are the kind of technical experts, but they don't understand development like you and your organisations and the partners that you work in do. And so they really need to have that development expertise there. So I would recommend, putting yourself out there, joining the different research networks, and just doing kind of your own research to find out where you could fit in, who are the big universities or other players that are likely to apply for some of that funding, and just putting yourself out there, contacting them through info at or whatever is written on their website. And just to say, there was a question that came through at the start just about how do you get yourselves on large consortia. It's very much that way. You just you do your research, you see what's likely to come out through the pipeline, and you introduce yourself to the organisation that you think would be successful in this, and you go and just say, this is what we can do, and you put together these things called capacity statements that talk about what your organisation can bring. And then when something comes out that's relevant, then you make contact and hope to bid together on something. Now after that run on consortia, can we move to the next slide, please? And other positives. So Comic Relief are still funding UK NGOs. They had their Sport for Change programme, which I'm sure a lot of your organisations watch quite closely. So things are still coming through and coming out. There will have been delays, definitely, but things are starting to trickle out again. And we've got up here that the UK NGOs can still apply for EU funding. Do not be scared off by the requirement. Do not be scared off by kind of looking into. There's there's things there where organisations feel that they may be penalised as a UK organisation applying for EU funding. That's not. That may happen, but if you're a bond member and you're experiencing that, please do reach out to me as well, because we can contact the FCDO, because they're really looking for examples of where organisations feel like they're being penalised. Because up to the moment, the UK is still paying into it, and there are opportunities coming through there. Lots of, as Michael mentioned, more flexible funding. Lots of donors and foundations are moving more to fund core costs. Unfortunately, the UK government isn't quite there yet, but as a lot of the learning has been that those organisations that had their core funding covered were able to respond quickly, and those that weren't core funding then got switched over to core funding. Unfortunately, not for the UK government quite yet. And then also just there that USAID, UK organisations are able to apply for USAID funding. So I would have a look there if that's something that you are interested in. And the same with other development banks like the Asian Development Bank. I know we're keen to engage with UK NGOs. So just to kind of pull it all together, I do appreciate that it's difficult for you and your organisations to find funding at the moment, but I think if you look at what you and your organisation are able to offer, if you're very clear on what you can bring to different programming, that there are places to find money, and it is hard and it's a long, hard slog, but I think there are opportunities out there. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Zoe. I'm sure that's going to raise a lot of questions.
Good morning. I'm joining this breakout panel looking at fundraising post-COVID. We're very sorry we couldn't be with you in person. I'm Gavin McLellan. I'm on the Scottish board for Institute of Fundraising in Scotland, and I'm also one of the chairs of one of the special interest groups for sole fundraisers across the UK. So I'm just here to take a few minutes to talk to you a little bit about some of the readiness we need to put in place for continuing fundraising in a post-COVID world. And also I just want to tell you a little bit about a research report recently commissioned by the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, which is reframing the ask and has some recommendations in it about what we can be doing or preparing for in a post-COVID world of fundraising. First of all, it's not all doom and gloom. There has actually been over the summer some really remarkable results and some great appeals and some headlines there that you can Google and have a look at, particularly in terms of online giving, particularly one example which had a 500% increase. A lot of the major charities are reporting some really successful online appeals. So some rethinking of what we're doing is showing some positive results. And there's a lot of concern about public fundraising, which is something which not everyone has the capacity to do, and perhaps that might be the case for quite a number of Alliance members, but there's a lot of guidance out there. You see the link there that you can click through once you get this presentation in terms of what we need to do for risk assessments to make sure that fundraising is safe, particularly for face-to-face, for street fundraising. Obviously events, most of which are being reviewed and postponed until 2021, and there's quite a number of documents there that Chartered Institute of Fundraising have created, and also with the fundraising regulator to help you think about the guidance and make sure that the public can be reassured that what you're doing in the public sphere of fundraising is going to be safe and going to be proceed well and be well thought through from a risk register point of view. In terms of the research, there's quite a bit here that is worth thinking about for reframing your strategy and thinking about the reframing the asks of your supporters. The link is there if you would like to read the report in full. It's commissioned by Institute of Fundraising, and also was done by visiting Professor Cathy Farrow at Cass Business School in City University in London, and also research fellow Tom Mackenzie at University of Dundee. It's primarily a literature review, so there's it's not got data, survey data in it, but nevertheless it's about an extrapolation of where we are and some useful indicators as to what we should be planning for. So what are we facing? And this is taken from HM Treasury data. It's put together the last 15 years or so of how fundraising income in an average sense and tailored for the large charities has been adjusted and tracks GDP. So we're looking at this very steep V plunging this year, and the government anticipates a bounce back to that in late 21-22. Of course, there's still Brexit to come after that, so that might need these to be revised quite a bit. But we are looking at a considerable downturn. Losses to the sector being estimated at 12.4 billion. So there's a great deal to do to try to recover some ground, particularly for 2020. So the outlook isn't great. However, up until this point, household giving has got a very good story to tell. There are 27 million households in the UK, and over the last 20 years we've seen the average amount that is given almost doubling, starting from £8.48 per donor household to nearly over £13 in 2018. But broadly it's been relatively flat actually in terms of this share of spending by households. We are literally all chasing after that 0.5 or 0.6% of household spending. And like I said, we're dealing with the impact of COVID, and then we've got Brexit to come. So where is the opportunity in all of this? The key, I think, is in the breakdown of the household giving. And perhaps there's a substitution effect here. Look at this little graph which groups together the 10 deciles of household spending. And if you look at the black bar, the orange bar, and the pink bar, these are all things we can't do anymore. A whole load of folk aren't spending money on transport. They're not commuting anymore. They're not going out to restaurants and cafes to anything like the extent that we did before. There's cinema and theatres we're not visiting. Where's all that spend going? Some of it's been saved. Some of it is being given, and perhaps more of it could be given. I think that is where our opportunity lies in terms of trying to get this substitution effect and finding a way for people to do something positive during this time and give some money to causes that they care about. But you might think, well, will donors feel that they can afford to give them? You might be experiencing some cancellations or whatever. But where that is happening, I think you should be seeing that as a deferment or a postponement. It's not an end of a relationship. It's not a cancellation. So therefore, it's important that your stewardship capability has to be ramped up in this time, and if your data allows you to do that. So make sure you're keeping in contact with your donors, with your existing donors. Many more ways of being able to do that. You could record a nice little update like this and put it out in your social media channels and so on. And then through that, you might be more in the frame to get some of that lockdown windfall, as it's described there, and the potential about £44 per week from households. So there's an opportunity there for our fundraising. What else needs to think about? Some of the other conclusions from the report suggest that stewardship is really, really important, particularly for the regular givers. Regular givers are represent about 50% of household giving, or the rest of it is all, reactive or unplanned. So it's something that gives you real steadiness in times of recession. Your older donors are more likely to do this. Rapid Data is one of the agencies that monitors and supports charities with regular giving. It's reporting small increase in direct debit cancellation, but not something that's really worrying or going up in a big way. But here's something we all can do: ramp up our online appeals. We've seen this huge surge in up-learning across the community for engaging with IT skills. All of us are doing Zoom calls. So many of us have had to increase our IT skills over the last little while, and particularly that is the older generation too. So we're seeing those percentages I've listed there are probably out of date already in terms of the people who are giving online. We're going to see that ramping up significantly as people are doing a lot more shopping online and so on. So this is something we need to develop significantly, and that's something you can do within your existing team fairly straightforwardly. There are lots of free resources out there to support social media campaigns. And one thing that is often overlooked in times like this, because it's so long term, is really think about your legacy proposition. If that's not in place already, now's the time to start developing that. Really think through. It will dip significantly in 2020 as there's the impact on asset values and house values and how that impacts on estates. But going from 2021, it's going to recover, and there's still got that generation, the boom generation, which are still looking at passing on their wealth. And so there's a real opportunity over the next 10 to 15 years, if you plan now and get your legacy propositions in place and keep at it and keep servicing it, then there's a real opportunity for long-term sustainability there. But that's something often overlooked in times of crisis like this. So that's where we need to, these are things that we just wanted to put into the discussion. Sorry, we're not here to be able to answer those questions. Perhaps on the Twitter handle, we might have some discussion there. So I hope you have a great discussion. So thank you so much for having us.
I think we have one question so far. From Lucinda Rivers, Michael mentioned that collecting and sharing data was a priority for philanthropists. Can he talk more about this? So yes, if in sort of a 1 or 2 minute soundbite, if you could just talk a little bit more about that, please, Michael.
Sure. Yeah, I think the main thing from a philanthropy perspective is that the imperative is around the need to coordinate the philanthropic response to the pandemic. So we've certainly seen a huge increase in initiatives like 360 Giving in the UK, a similar organisation called Candid in the US, or in Italy, there's the Asafero data mapping project. And that's really highlighting where the gaps are in existing funding, where there's a risk of duplication, and where there are opportunities for collaboration. So I think it's really mobilised the sector to be a lot more transparent and cognizant of the value of data.
Brilliant, thank you, Michael. I hope that answers your question, Lucinda. I don't see any more raised hands or questions in the. Oh, okay. We have 2 questions. Okay. So for Zoe, is there any sense of a priority within the SDGs? We have a water supply project in Sierra Leone for less than 100,000 to provide water and sanitation for 12,000 people who have no water supply. Oh, okay. That's quite a specific question on is water and sanitation fashionable? Yeah, I don't know. So if you're able to offer anything on that question in the chat box.
I don't have a specific example, but I would have thought water and sanitation, given COVID-19 and the need to wash hands, and there's been a real focus on on water and sanitation. So I don't know the last time you tried to get funding for that, but I would have thought that could be something that funders are definitely interested in at the moment. So I mean, if you want, you can message me afterwards. I'll put my email in the chat box and we can have a think about that. But that should definitely be something that you should be able to get funding with at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you, Zoe. I will use Chair's privilege to ask a question to Stella, if that's okay. So it's really interesting learning about the different kinds of ways of diaspora giving and the different products. I mean, do you see a change in the ways that diaspora are giving? You know, are we likely to see more giving through these different types of products? What might sort of the next sort of few years look like in terms of the landscape of diaspora giving?
Thanks for the question, Tom. I think in terms of diaspora giving, I think this is something that we talk about all the time, in the sense that it's ongoing and it doesn't change. And actually, in times of crisis, it actually increases. We saw this during the 2008 financial crisis, when remittances increased by 8%, I think. We saw it again during Ebola, when remittances increased to Sierra Leone by as much as 50%. So, I think in terms of diaspora contributions, of course, we talk a lot about remittances because it is quantified, or it is quantifiable. And so we can see that. In terms of diaspora sharing skills, what we're seeing, because normally, again, at this time, what you would see is a lot of diaspora professionals who would be going to countries of origin to offer their skills. What you're seeing is much more of a use of technology and digital platforms, and people actually providing information that way because they are unable to travel at this time. But also, interestingly, even though we have the predictions about remittances going down, as of July of this year, remittances to Zimbabwe had actually increased by 33% compared to July 2019. And that could be because people are using more formal channels because they are unable to travel. There are all sorts of reasons as a result of that. But I think you may very well see a change in how the diaspora engage and give, not necessarily in how much they give, because I think that is just going to continue. That's going to be a constant. There might be a little bit of a dip for different reasons, but that really continues. But I think what we need to also consider, which is really important, is also about the development of structures. A lot of what the diaspora do and how they do it is very informal. What we've been trying to do and arguing for is actually about developing more structures for sending skills or for remitting skills, right? So we had a program many years ago, which was a diaspora volunteering program. Over 3 years, we had about 155 people who went across from the UK to Sierra Leone and Ghana, etc. And we need more structures like these to be able to support and to add value to how the diaspora give. More structures like diaspora bonds, match fund schemes, and some of which we've already put together already. And that's where we see the future. That's where we see it. It's about adding value. And also the use of international aid can be even more creative as well, in terms of how it becomes a part of the match fund schemes, or even blended finance programs at a sort of, not at a macro, like level, but at the level at which a lot of organizations operate, which is within the middle space as well. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful, Stella. No, that's really interesting, and I'm sure a lot of those here will be really interested to learn more about diaspora funding, how best to also engage with diaspora groups as well. So I'm sure obviously your contacts are available, and people can find you to ask those questions, and we can also engage in the chat box, etc., with ongoing discussion. I think that is sort of all the time we have in terms of asking questions, but thank you very much for sending all of those in. Thank you, all of you, for joining today. Particular thank you to our speakers. I'm sure you'll agree, gave us many reasons to be positive around the funding landscape in the coming months. We hope you enjoyed the session. Just to remind you, you can use the discussion forum. There's a dedicated chat thread for today's session. Thank you very much.